Okay, today is actually going to be a movie review because once in a while, like Joker for example, a film comes along that catches attention and makes me think about much broader topics. Dune is one of those movies. I've said the word review already, which is probably still fairly accurate, but I also want to expand on that and use the film as a lens by which modern Hollywood trends and industry standards can be analyzed. So, without further ado, let's get started. Dune is a high concept science fiction property that dates back to the 1960s. Originally in the form of a novel, Dune was very well received and widely recognized by the science fiction enthusiast community as a well crafted story. My dad actually read the book when he was a lot younger, and it certainly came up in conversation during my own childhood, which led me to read it as well. But I have to confess that I read it about 13 to 15 years ago, so I'm not coming at this with a fresh off the pages perspective. That being said, I do have some lingering memories of the original text, and I do think that there have been some changes that are worth looking at. However, I will not be coming at this from a book snob perspective, where I frame everything that's different as unilaterally bad by default. Different mediums require different approaches. That much has always been true. And since I'm in kind of a comfortable middle ground here, where I sort of remember what the book had to offer, with the movie now really fresh in my mind, I wanted to make this review slash critique, because a lot of the criticism I see right now feels just bad, or kind of wrong. A quick disclaimer here, you are going to effectively watch a still wallpaper this entire time for the whole video. I won't have background visuals hardly at all, and that's not because it isn't possible to do. Some reviews probably have amazing editing that combines actual footage with an adaptability at mitigating copyright flags, but for me, I don't have those editing capabilities myself, and Warner Brothers is notorious for their zealous copyright policy. They will, and have before on my own channel multiple times, claimed things for a simple 4-second clip of audiovisual content. They often release the strike afterwards, but that means a month of revenue held in escrow. If they don't release the copyright, it can mean an actual strike as well. That's the real dangerous thing. It can mean videos being blocked in a bunch of different countries automatically, and my audience is over 50% global. So all in all things considered, I can't show scenes from Dune right now because it would almost certainly damage the video. But I think that's pretty much okay because the visual aspects of this film are an incredibly strong area, and there will be plenty of content floating around if you do want to check out some of those cinematic moments. In a film so visually strong, I almost view certain shots as spoilers in and of themselves, so I'm fine with having a mostly static background, but I'm sure that anyone who wants to can find other places and reviews with a much different approach. I will certainly have narrative spoilers in this video, so keep that in mind, but visually it's going to be kind of more of a podcast than anything else for this one. Dune is, in my opinion at least, an incredible movie. It's not perfect, but for anyone who remembers, I praised the Snyder Cut of Justice League almost exclusively on the premise of it being a win for the true fans. And Dune is in a very similar position right now. As a brief overview, Dune is set in a futuristic interstellar society. This society, beneath an emperor, is composed of noble houses, or fiefs. Of these houses, there are a number that hold significant importance, but one in particular, House Atreides, is considered the crown jewel of the empire. House Atreides, through imperial decree, is given control of a particular planet called Arrakis. Arrakis is the only known location where a resource called spice can be found, and thus the controlling house of the planet will accrue significant wealth and be in control of a central resource in the universe. Here's the first and largest criticism that I have with the movie. It is not properly explained at all just how critical spice is to the empire and society as a whole. Spice in this movie is described as a hallucinogen with positive properties, as well as an integral part of space travel, but it's never really emphasized as the most critical thing in the entire known universe. I understand that movies require a radical reformat of information when compared to a book, but this seemed like one of the things that could have used much more emphasis. Additionally, Dune is a work of science fiction that deals with highly philosophical concepts. For instance, as far as I recall, it points toward a society that has evolved in the aftermath of rebellion against machines that we ourselves crafted. There is actually a ban in the lore on thinking machines because of some sort of history with electronic computing. That might seem like an easy thing to pare down in the writing process, but it actually ripples outward in a negative way when it's not described properly. Example, for one very small scene, right, and this is just one individual example, we see a character's eyes flash white as they basically relay complex analytical data. That was a mentat, that's what that type of person is called, but someone coming in fresh probably would never really understand what it actually means. A mentat is a discipline where certain people effectively become a replacement, a human replacement for computers. Through various different augmentations and techniques, they take on the role of calculating and computing information, which makes them important, and they're marked with the black stripe on their lip. And it makes them very valuable as well. But that kind of class distinction is almost totally lost in the film, and it's not the only time it happens. Still, to be fair, knowing that you can't really convert hundreds of pages of lore building into 2 hours on a screen, at least not perfectly by any stretch, it's not a major flaw that hinders the actual progression of the story. Anyway, House Atreides is given control of the planet Arrakis, which is very important, and charged with fulfilling the spice harvesting duties that intrinsically come with the planet. To do this, they need to meet a schedule, while doing battle with the elements, the rebellious native forces, and avoiding the iconic sandworms, these giant worms that cruise beneath the desert eating things whenever they make vibrational sounds, or send ripples out through the sand. They're pretty cool. These hindering factors are explained fairly well, and there are some incredibly well shot scenes of the desert that help to build the atmosphere. That's an area where Dune excels tremendously, by the way. Atmosphere building is a central pillar of this movie, and it was a central pillar of the book as well. I'll discuss later on how that kind of world building has led to fairly idiotic criticism of the title and the movie, but for right now, I would express it as a decidedly positive choice. One thing to keep in mind, this movie was directed by the same person as Blade Runner 2042. I liked Blade Runner, and I think it was an excellent movie, but again, high concept, slow building themes that are best described not as a roller coaster, but as the entire day where you go to the theme park. Let me explain that a bit further because, in my opinion, it's integral for people to understand this before judging the film. Most modern movies are like a roller coaster. You get on for a couple minutes, you go up and just like cruise up into the air on the track, and then you start speeding through the course with the wind in your hair and a rush of adrenaline. That's what most movies now do, or at least want to do and try to do, especially science fiction and fantasy films. Dune, like Blade Runner, is not the same. If a standard action movie is just the roller coaster, Dune would be the entire day. The roller coaster itself only happens after you wake up, take out the dog, eat your breakfast, whatever you have to do, drive to the park, wait in line, go to the bathroom, wait in line again, and then finally you get on the ride. These are all required steps to achieve that smaller segment of fun, and Dune, unlike most modern cinema these days, isn't shying away from that. These menial steps, like allowing for people to understand the world and characters before throwing action and conflict at them, are embraced in this film, and I believe people should know that before they spend money on a ticket or rent the movie online. With that out of the way, we can get back to the narrative. House Atreides is given control of Arrakis, and Paul, the young prince of the house, is revealed to be special. This is another area where those who come in with fresh eyes and zero knowledge might feel a little bit lost. Paul has clearly been able to train and cultivate powers of sorts, which make him a potential messiah figure. What isn't properly explained, or if it was, I missed it or didn't process it correctly, is that Paul has been deliberately bred into existence by the Bene Gesserit order. The Bene Gesserit are powerful, and even more so than the film manages to communicate, they are world-shaping members of this feudal society. One of the reasons why this might fall flat is because the actress who plays Jessica, Paul's mother, tried to read the book when she accepted the role, a very important role for this movie, got bored, and refused to finish it. She described it as a crossword puzzle, saying it was so complicated that she gave up and refused to keep going. Her solution? Ask her director and co-star, who she described as Tweedledee and Tweedledum, because they both read the book and liked the universe, thereby understanding the characters and lore. She asked them, "Explain this to me like I'm a child." And they did. Well, something somewhere got lost in translation because the Bene Gesserit are an insanely powerful, mostly female order, and she does not communicate that properly at all. Bene Gesserit can do a number of different things, like control others with their voice, move with incredible precision, like martial arts, speed, and strength, tell when people are lying through telepathic control, and even the ability to control their own fertility, such as choosing to have a baby boy. Jessica is supposed to be an amazingly strong woman from the books, but I just didn't get that vibe from the movie. It felt like she grappled with her own emotions entirely too much, and they're supposed to have intrinsic control of those through the training, which didn't make a lot of sense. And for many people, that might go completely under the radar and just not be noticed at all, but for others, they might notice, and it might seem kind of strange. Moving on. Once we establish that Paul is likely this messiah figure of sorts, the film starts to add some action. The previous house to control the planet, Harkonnen, attacks. This is where, once again, there are some strange aspects that would benefit from further clarity, but overall, there are some great scenes. Basically, every battle is hand-to-hand. Why? Because people have shields, and these shields make bullets completely obsolete. However, bladed weapons can pierce the shield if they move at certain speeds and apply constant pressure. It's a trained skill, like a trained warrior skill, being able to strike through the shield and kill an enemy, so almost all battles end up being done with knives and swords. However, there are explosive devices used in the film, which kind of differs from the books, but that's kind of a side note, doesn't really matter, which makes people wonder, some people, where is all the action? When we're so used to railguns, laser beams, and missiles dominating all the sci-fi movies, we forget that maybe there is a reason that they aren't there and don't exist. I've seen people saying, it's so boring. Why don't they just shoot each other with laser weapons that they could obviously create, right? Because they're so used to that in other movies. But the short and simple answer is that they can't have that kind of weaponry in this universe because of a feedback loop or something like that from a laser weapon hitting a shield, which would detonate a massive explosion at both ends of the connection. That's just the description of what happens. I don't know exactly how it works or why. I just don't remember, honestly. It's been like 15 years, but there is a hard-baked reason why the combat happens this way. I don't think it needs to change just because most viewers have an attention span south of 30 seconds. Anyway, the previous house to control the world invades, House Atreides is betrayed, and it turns out the Emperor has sided against them, sending some of his special troops. I forget the name. This happens for a few reasons, but mostly it seems due to a perceived threat. Atreides is too powerful, the Emperor wants them overthrown, and as the battle finishes, Paul and his mother flee to the desert. This is the most action in the film, and there are some incredible shots, really incredible shots. Choreography-wise, some of the fights weren't my favorite thing, but overall it was very, very good. Some of the characters that get introduced are strange or even gross. Some have lengthy backstory that we just don't know in the movie because it's a movie and not a book. But ultimately there is a sense of power, conflict, death, and rebirth as Paul and his mother join with the Fremen, the rebels who are native to the planet, and venture out into the desert as the film concludes. It's basically half of the overall story, and I for one am incredibly excited to watch whatever comes next, but it's over 2.5 hours with much of that time dedicated to building out crucial information just so that the viewer can have a basic understanding of this world and universe. Side effect? Paul is the only character we adequately get to know. No one else gets a large amount of screen time, and that's not a flaw by default. The acting is very, very good, for the most part, with the exception, in my opinion, of Jessica, his mother, but overall it contributes to an atmosphere where those who are not feeling invested or interested, at least not the entire time, will rapidly lose interest to a point of pure boredom. That's kind of a risk that is being run here. It's funny to me because the movie is described as slow and boring, but since when is plot speed considered a de facto negative? I don't feel that the word slow denotes any sort of problem. It's not a universal pejorative. And in a world where the ADHD-fueled high-octane, non-stop explosive action seems to be common, while writing is treated as a stunted afterthought in a lot of movies, I have found Dune to be a refreshing film that becomes interesting for reasons other than $100 million of special effects. Yes, the movie had a very, very large budget, a massive budget, and contains crazy special effects. It does, in quite a few scenes, but they didn't just punt the script downfield and give up while relying on some big battles to sell all the little kiddies. They stuck true to the subject matter in a lot of ways. Enough ways to feel, or to not feel like a slap in the face though, which is good, which pays off as well, and makes for a very interesting story. If people thought the movie was slow, the book is like a glacier, basically. It's moving, and it's powerful, but it's not sliding down the hill at you like an avalanche. There were some changes that felt dumb, like race and gender swapping a particular side character. For what reason? Like, why exactly was that done? Also, that character gets a completely different death that feels more meaningful and less idiotic because, again, question mark, like what was the reason for that? But it's not littered with references to the horrible patriarchy or missing white woman syndrome or toxic masculinity, etc., etc. Like, they didn't go down that rabbit hole, which too much of Hollywood has been doing recently. Another criticism that I hear is that the colors are drab, washed out, less saturated, and that rooms are dark, subdued, or uninteresting. It's a depressing movie. Again, this is a product of lore and accuracy. Arrakis is a sand planet with hallucinogenic particles in the sand and ridiculous temperatures with brutal sun. Not only that, but it's a planet dominated by conflict and strife, so the fact that they don't have windows, or the fact that everything feels dark and locked down, that's because it's designed to be that way. Windows are, believe it or not, weak points in structural design. They live with the knowledge that they can be attacked at any time. They live there knowing that sand is dangerous, storms come and go, weather is catastrophic, and generally speaking, this is an inhospitable planet. Over time, that atmosphere will change as a sort of symbiosis emerges between Paul and the desert world, at least I think, but the idea that this is some sort of washed out, slow-moving, and depressing movie, I just can't agree with that. Some of these complaints are exacerbated by the way the film was marketed. They show trailers that would make you believe it's a non-stop action film through and through, but anyone who has read the book, even someone like me who remembers hardly anything from it, will know that if it's at all true to the source material, that could never be true. I'm not saying that in a snarky way, by the way, like, oh, you should have read the book. I'm saying that in an honest way, because if all you ever saw were trailers on HBO Max, then yeah, you'll probably feel a sense of boredom compared to expectations. However, all of it speaks to the standards we now have for entertainment. It doesn't need to be nonstop action. It doesn't need to bombard your senses with audiovisual extravagance. What it needs to do is entertain. You can entertain someone by intriguing them. You can entertain someone by impressing them with set pieces and cinematic shots, or combining music with story beats to make the audience feel something. All of that is possible. You can make a movie, it doesn't hardly happen anymore on a grand mainstream scale, but it should. You can make a movie that uses highly philosophical concepts to hook an audience in and make them think about what's going on. I know most viewers don't want to, or literally can't, think these days, but Dune starts to go down that road, and personally, I think it's amazing. It's not 100% true to the book. Some stuff got moved and changed and adjusted, but that's natural in an adaptation. The marketing could be called deceptive if you want, based on expectations versus reality, maybe, but this movie delivers on some incredible elements that make it enjoyable to watch, enjoyable to listen to, the sound design is impeccable, and most of all, intriguing to think about. Could it have contained more info? Yeah, in my opinion, it probably could have. Some of the choices feel strange about what to include versus what not to include, like some of the important things that should have been there weren't, maybe, but it's a small complaint, really. All in all, it's a great movie that was made for the fans. They could have altered this story in a much more mainstream way a whole hell of a lot and made it closer to what sells in Hollywood these days, but they didn't do it. I respect that choice, because making content for a fan base and then stopping short of radical efforts to maximize that fan base is great to see, and it preserves the quality of the artwork by not bastardizing it into a checklist endeavor aimed at preteen, low attention span idiocy. Dune is worth watching if you go into it ready for something slow, well crafted, and interesting. Also, definitely go read some synopsis wiki pages before or after, and definitely look at some sort of condensed lore guide, maybe, because the stuff that they don't put in is just as good as the stuff that they do. You don't have to read the book, like I said, it's a lot, but the more you understand about that world, the better, because it is deserving, interesting, and well made. That's it. Criticism of Dune, to me, at least in my opinion, is less about the movie having flaws and more about modern Hollywood practices being kind of trashy and shallow. Movies can have different speeds. That's possible. Why are we condemning that? They can have different emphasis, and we should be happy about high-concept philosophical sci-fi movies being made with large budgets, even if we don't personally like them. Action-fueled monotony will make for an industry that spurns innovation and rejects historically successful worlds and novels and concepts. I want more movies like Dune, even if I don't like some of them, when compared to less, just because I want everything to be a high-octane, like, crappy, shallow, oh, look at all these explosions, yeah. Like, I'm just so sick of that from Hollywood. It's worth it. Go watch it. Also, links down below to support the channel, like a YouTube platform alternative you can sign up for, or locals to give $5 a month and help the channel, but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.